Hey everyone, this is Yann from Devolutions. I want to welcome you to this recorded webinar that we recently did with Adam Listek. This video is all about going beyond the basics of Remote Desktop Manager. You're going to see automation, scripting tools, how to improve your security posture, all sorts of great stuff that I know you're going to enjoy. We've also included YouTube timestamps so that you can jump around to the content that you want to see. So without further ado, let's check out the webinar. Today, I'm going to introduce a very special speaker. He's a good friend of ours. He's been working with for maybe a little about 2 years or so, but he is Adam Listek. So Adam, I'm gonna bring you into our podcast screen here. So how are you doing, Adam?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be talking to everyone and showing RDM stuff and kind of diving in and hopefully things that are useful and actually relevant. And so, yeah, thanks so much.
Adam's a new member on our team here. He'll talk about a little bit about that as well, but he's well acquainted with Devolutions. So he's been helping us with the different materials and so forth. And recently we brought him onto the product marketing team as a technical specialist, which is great because it'll always help us to provide better content for you folks. But this webinar actually came because number one, our wonderful event coordinator, Jenny, was like, hey, Yann, it's time for a webinar. We got to get something done. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And we actually polled you folks and said, what do you guys want to know? What would you want to see? And the result was, we want to see more RDM. So let's get this party started.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so let kind of jump in here. So Thank you, Yann, for that awesome intro. So I want to start with, how many tools do you use? For myself, a little too many. I found that like a 2023 productive report actually showed that 87 SaaS applications are in use on average.
That's crazy.
So Remote Desktop Manager, or RDM, kind of aims to be that single pane of glass for many in IT. It may not replace 87 applications, but a whole lot of tasks can be done within. So as an avid Devolutions user for several years, actually believed in the product so much that I joined the company full time. So as Yann said, my name's Adam Listek. I've been in IT for 20 plus years and tackled tons of different challenges, as most of us here have. And I've found that RDM brings together much of the day-to-day functionality I need. So instead of a long intro, I kind of want to just dive in, cover as much as I can, spread over these kind of 4 different sections. And I'm hopeful that you see yourself in these scenarios and how to use RDM to make your life easier.
All right.
So without further ado, let's jump into workflow automation.
Okay.
Automation removes that kind of repetitive, monotonous tasks, saving time, energy, and money. And you can either automate RDM itself or integrate other automation tools. How often do you need to pull a system log? A customer calls in, perhaps they're an internal user, and they have both a Windows and Linux server. Collecting the logs from a system should be easy, especially to save for later. So instead of wading through the GUI, what if you could automatically run a PowerShell or Bash script against a remote system, do just that? So with the screen up, we're going to jump in and kind of show you how to do this.
Awesome.
So the first thing I need to do is create a PowerShell script to run against a remote system. So on our data source, we'll right click and we're going to create a new entry. We're going to scroll down. We're going to actually look for PowerShell. Type that right. And I'm going to do a remote console. Or, of course, the very first thing I pick is the wrong one. All right. I'm going to do new entry, and we're actually going to do PowerShell. And we're going to look for the remote one. There we go. So once we start that up.
And that's the green one, right?
That is the green one. Yep, the green one.
Okay,
so, and once it starts, I need a name. I'm going to call this one Collect Logs. I'm going to actually change this to an embedded script. Very handy to kind of be able to just save your scripts within. I'm going to click the blue Edit Embedded, and I'm going to put something in here. For this one, it's a very simple script. Basically, all I'm doing is creating a date time variable, and from the get date commandlet. And then what I'm doing is using this kind of built-in WEVT util which is a built-in Windows utility to actually export event viewer logs in this .evtx format. And I'm just using this datetime variable to save like a unique name for it. So once I have that, I'm just going to click OK. And I'm going to change a few options here. I actually want this to exit right away. So I'm going to uncheck the no exit. I'm going to hide the window, and I want this to run as administrator. So once I'm done there, I'm going to click OK. And I have my little remote tool here. But I need somewhere to run this. I need a target for a macro to run against. So I'm going to create an RDP entry. Once again, right click, new entry, and RDP happens to be selected there. So I'm going to need to enter a name on this. And for this one, I'm going to add in here. Happens to also be the same as my host. And actually, the one thing, of course, I did that. The one thing I need to do is just to make my life a little easier, and I'm going to use link credentials. So I'm going to create a quick username here. I'm going to just call this admin user. And this way I can link the credentials against a lot of different items, and just makes life a lot easier not having to remember and re-enter all of those credentials over and over. So do that. Now, once I have that, once again, go back to where I was. There we go. All right, popular. We're going to look up RDP. And once that's there, once again, put in what my host name is. There it is. Awesome. And then for this, instead of entering it, I'm going to actually use this linked. And then you can see I have this admin user there. So I'm going to click OK. And we have our session. Now, just to make sure that this works, voila, it shows up. Awesome. So I can leave that running right now. But what I want to do is I want to show running this remote PowerShell script against this DC. So to do that, what's really cool is I can right click on it. I can go down to macros and I can find my little collect logs down here.
Awesome.
And I'm going to run that. It's going to kind of open its own window over here. It's going to do its thing. It runs very quickly. And then once it closes in a second here, and you'll notice, since I happen to have the window open, it immediately created these two application system logs. And what's neat about this is for this particular thing, I can open it and it's a point in time save of the event viewer. So just a handy, like this could be many different scripts, but in this case, just showing how you can actually create these little PowerShell scripts and run them against remote systems very easily. So it's still thinking here, but now, what if you have a Linux server as well? So you have a couple options. If you have PowerShell installed on the Linux server, you could, with remote install, use that. But plenty of sysadmins aren't interested in actually collecting those logs and installing additional installs like PowerShell on there. So with that in mind, we're going to actually create a new entry, but this time we're going to choose SSH shell. So I'm going to choose that one, open it up. And on this, I'm going to just call this one Ubuntu. I know, very descriptive. I'm going to put a little, the IP of this one in. And once again, I can actually use my linked credential for this one. So very handy. And I will save and click OK. And so now that I have my new one here, I can double click that, double check that it works. There it is. Very fancy Ubuntu system. And I want to actually run a script against this. Now the macro, the same setup here with PowerShell, it's a little different. I can actually right click on this. And with this session open, it does need to be open. I can choose this execute script in terminal. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. You can choose commands, but in my case, I've actually created a script file. And the reason I did this is because if you have a shared folder of scripts against, for your whole team, maybe on a shared drive, this is a way that you could kind of pre-create these scripts and have available for use. In this case, I have this log zip. I'm going to open that up. And I wanted to show this real quick, though. Again, nothing fancy. This is just Visual Studio Code here, but what you'll see is very similar to what I did on the other one. I'm creating in shell, a scripting language, a date time variable, and then I'm just using the zip command to actually create a zip of everything under var log. The one unique part about this, though, is you'll see these little enter command sequences. And this is just saying that for each one of these lines, I want to run a new line and enter, and so that each thing goes sequentially. If you don't, then they'll kind of all go together in a line, which is why I do have these semicolons here. And if I didn't put the enter, I'd have to take out the comments. But now that I've got that, I can go over here and say, okay, cool, I want to execute this. And you'll notice each one of those lines just executes and does its thing.
Oh man!
And there we go. We have our new var log, or I guess, yeah, var log underscore date time save of the files. And the one thing is, you do need to have the session open on here. So it's a little different. It can't run quite as transparently in the background, but it works great. So far, I've run scripts against remote systems, but sometimes you may have connections you want to configure within RDM. So thankfully, RDM tightly integrates with Active Directory and PowerShell. And, manually populating tens to hundreds of entries within RDM could be pretty tedious. One example I've actually encountered before is a yearly inventory. So instead of walking to every room, if you know the MAC address of a system, could you link that address to a specific network port? I could save time by exporting the CSV of MAC addresses to ports from my network here and compare that to RDM systems. But before I do that, I'll need to add all of the AD computers to RDM with synchronizers. So a very cool functionality is, if you want to pull in systems or sessions from other systems out there, you can actually create what are known as a synchronizer. And in this case, I'm going to use Active Directory. So I create a new entry, go down to Synchronizer, Active Directory Synchronizer. And when I click OK, I'm going to give this a name. Let's call this AD Sync.
Love the name.
Yeah, I'm very descriptive, I know. I'm going to change the mode over to my domain. I'm going to use LDAP over SSL. I'm going to test the connection. Yay, it looks good. I'm going to click Preview. Now, I have one system here, so it may be a lot more on your side, but showing that it's working. I'm going to click OK to save. Now, to actually run this, you would right-click and choose Open Session. And it will think for a moment, and hey, added. You'll notice that the DVLS popped right in on the side. So very cool that we can immediately get all those different systems we have. And you can limit this by OU or whatever you might need, make it a little easier. All right, so now with all the systems added, I actually want to take a look at the DC one we have here. And if I go to Properties, and I scroll down to Asset and Location, I have this room field. I'd really like to know where this thing is and what it's connected to. So thankfully, we can run a PowerShell script against these systems to kind of locate their MAC address, link that address within the CSV file, and then populate the associated room value. Now, there are several ways I could run this script. Externally, I can run the script in Visual Studio Code, or I could create an RDM PowerShell entry. I'm going to demonstrate both in this. So either way, for both, on the system that RDM is running, I do need to have the devolutions.powershell RDM module, this guy. And I need to be running PowerShell 7.2 or greater. The current version is 7.3, but you need a newer version of PowerShell than the Windows PowerShell that's built in. So I've created this script, and it may be 41 lines. Some of this is kind of some error checking, but essentially I'm just saying for this, hey, make sure I've got the right versions, make sure I have the Devolutions PowerShell module installed, and then I'm going to import the CSV file. I'm going to get the current RDM data source, in this case DVLS, If that's not connected, it's actually going to pop open a browser window to authenticate me. And then once that's done, I'm going to output the CSV, get all of the sessions of RDP, and then for each one of those, I'm going to reach into the other system, get its MAC address, compare that to what's in the CSV, and then actually write that back to RDM itself. And this update RDM, that will reflect those changes in RDM. So looking at that, I'm actually going to run this. And if my code is all correct and works as it has before, one may hope, it's going to do its thing. And you'll notice that I have some login here, but saying 201, saying 335. And that room CSV is real simple. MAC address to location, what you might see from a network switch port. And so I'm going to pop back over to RDM. And now if I actually go take a look at properties, and I go over to asset and location, it will naturally not be there. Oh, you know what? I wonder if... Gotta love when you do this 100 times and then the one time. All right, that's it. Okay. And the joy of live demos is no matter how much you practice, it doesn't always work.
Yeah, it's okay. I can't tell you how many times I've been recording a YouTube video and man, the whole thing just not necessarily RDM's fault. Sometimes it's a Windows update. There's things going on, but
well, you know what? We are gonna try. Let's do this. We're gonna do some real-time troubleshooting here, real fast. Let's see what I got here. Cool. I'm disconnected. My thought is what I need to actually do. I think this is going to be why this didn't work. Is it sat for so long? I need to refresh that credential. All right, as it loads up here real quick.
While you're doing that, I just want to remind everybody. Yeah. So while Adam's updating that, if you want to, at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So you can ask questions now, by the way, nothing wrong. We have our super amazing, awesome power troubleshooter, customer support, service technicians, everybody that's upstairs. They are answering questions right now. So if you have any questions specifically, they'll start popping out answers and sending you either documentation or help you out with your questions right now. But if there's something specific to this presentation you want later on, Adam will hop in and we'll get over that. But I'll put it back to your screen here. But
yep, absolutely.
There you go.
I think I've almost got sorted out. I'll see if this works. All right. Once again, see if I get lucky this time around. All right. All right. Hey, success. Yeah, the one I let it sit for so long that, of course, it needed to re-authenticate itself. So either way, all right. So great. So that's one way we can run it externally. But what would be also cool is if you could save this within RDM itself and actually run. So I'm going to create a new PowerShell and session itself here. And one of the things you can do here is you can actually run an embedded script. I'm going to call this populate rooms. I'm going to change this to embedded script, much like before. Let me actually take this entire script, put it in there. Carries the formatting, but it'll still work. I do need to set the PowerShell version as 7. And I'm not going to tell it, I'm going to say it's okay not to exit because I'd actually like to see it. I'm going to run as admin. And then I'm going to use the same kind of link credentials as we have been in the past. And I'm going to click OK. And it'll pop in on the side here. And so when I actually run this and open, it will run in there. And like before, it's going to just run that same script, but this time it is saved within. And it wants to authenticate. This is what it did prior, and so it's going to same pop open that thing. Cool. We're all good there. Pop back. And it'll run through the script again. So you have two different ways that you can actually run scripts within to either integrate RDM itself, to run external PowerShell scripts, or against RDM to modify things within. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to automate your processes, and hopefully RDM can help with that. All right. So I want to jump onto the next section here.
Fantastic.
Yep, multi-platform integration. So multiple OS environments are common, and when a problem occurs, it can be pretty difficult to juggle all the different connections. One host can have different protocols, and different problems require different connections. Now, traditionally, you could manually create the connections for each, but there are more flexible ways. So the first method I'm going to show is using folders to inherit the necessary credentials. This way, you populate the values once, and the sub-entries inherit from the folder. If the folder values or credentials change, no need to update each connection. So I'm going to first create a folder here. The same new entry, but this time folder. And then I am going to give this a name. And I'm going to just call this, in this case, I'm going to call it the same as the host. In this case, 23092209. But I am going to change the folder type to that of server. And this does matter because this gives us this host field along with some credentials. And that host field's crucial for sharing variables down. And so once it's in there, I'm actually going to tell, once again, to use these link credentials. And this is such a great way to not have to hard code credentials, or at least one spot where you can update it and everything linked across it will use it. So I'm going to click OK, I have my folder. So now what I want to do is I want to actually create some sub entries for this. So I'm going to right click on that folder, make new entry. This time I'll choose RDP. And once I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this RDP. Super descriptive, I know. And then I'm going to choose inherited actually for the credentials. And down here on the host, I'm going to use a variable. Now, this one is computer host. But if you want to see all the variables, there's this button down here that says variables. You click that and you can kind of see all the different types. And there's a lot of them. Parent variables, global environment. So in this case, I'm just using the computer host one. And that's pretty much all I need for that. So I'm going to click OK. I'll get my little sub entry here. And I can actually create show differing ones here. I'm going to create a new entry. And then this time, I'm going to create an SSH shell. And yes, this is a Windows box, but I do have SSH and other things turned on it. So let's call this SSH. Similar to before, I'm going to create computer host. I'm going to use the same inherited credentials. And I'll just click OK. And then to show how you can add like even a different terminal type, I'm going to add PowerShell. I'm going to say, hey, a remote console. Now, if you use a computer name, this will be WinRM. If you use SSH, it'll be SSH. Both actually can coexist. And in this case, both are turned on at the same time. So I'm actually going to show SSH on there. Although both work just fine. And then we're going to say inherited. Cool. All right, so I've got all three. I am going to close this RDP. And then I'm going to show, say, open RDP session. It pulls down the host automatically through that variable, lets you write in. If I want to open a PowerShell SSH session, let's make sure I didn't typo something here as happens. Oh, helps to put in the correct variable in there. So once I do that, let's try that again. And then once I double click on there, it should pop open. There we go. All right. And cool. You can see on there. And same if I do a straight up SSH session. And there we go. So it inherits those values. Very useful. All right. But there's other ways to do this. And that's where templates come in. So, because even when you're doing it, you're creating a folder, you're creating a host, and then you're creating all these sub entries. It's just a lot of work. So, I want to actually create a template that can utilize those variables and run one single entry against different template types like RDP or SSH. But this does require the use of the password variable. So, to do that, I do have to make sure that I have permission to do it. So, I'm actually going to go over to administration and click system settings and come down to password policy. And there's this checkbox to allow password variable for all entries. And there is one for macros as well, but in this case, I really just need the entries one. And click OK. And so once I have that set, I'm going to actually go create a template. So you do this by clicking File and then Templates and then Entry Templates. And I'll have this place where I can organize everything. I'm going to add a new one, a template, and I'm going to say RDP. And so I'm going to give this the super descriptive name of RDP template. And this is where I'm going to actually put in the various variables that I need to put in. So once again, we use computer host. I'm going to use username. We use domain. And even though it looks weird, I'm going to put in this password variable in there. But there is one other step, and you got to go over to password. If I click on all the things, I'll get there. Allow password in variable. So this does have to be done for this as well. And then once I'm done, click OK. This is just saying, hey, that $password $is not a good one. So I'm going to ignore this for now. But since it's a variable, that's not actually what's being used. Click another template. I'm going to make shell just to show how this works as well. sh shell template. Again, I'm going to create, computer host variable. I'm going to username, password. I don't need a domain for this one. Make sure I have that typed right. And again, I got to remember to come over here to security settings, allow password in variable, and click OK and ignore. All right, so I've got my two templates. Now what I can do is come back over here, and I'm actually going to create a new entry. I'm going to call this, it's going to be a generic host. So it's kind of like a folder for a multiple different protocols on a specific system. So in this case, again, I'm going to call this system here DC 092209. But what I'm going to do, make sure I have all the credentials. In fact, I'm going to use the same linked ones because make life easy. And then I have my host there. I have my link credentials and click OK. Now to actually run this generic host, because this doesn't have a specific protocol, I'm going to right click, open with parameters, open with the template. And you'll notice I have my two templates here. So if I choose RDP, it pulls in all of those variables and then just sends it right over. And same thing with open with parameters, open template, SSH, and there you go. Same deal. So I have a couple different ways that I can actually run these templates or through folders if you have multiple connection types for a specific host. It's a great way to kind of help organize everything. So what if I need to kind of quickly run commands in a terminal? This is another feature that I found that I thought would be super helpful, and called SSH Shell Typing Macro Toolbar. It's a mouthful, but essentially you can create some typing macros and have those readily available in the SSH shell. So to do this, what we're going to do, we first need some macros. So I'm going to actually organize these in a folder. I'm going to just call all these macros. Yeah, there's nothing much to this one, just a folder. And then underneath, I'm going to make a new entry. And I'm actually going to go down to this macro script toolbar or tool section, and I'm going to choose typing macro. And I've got a couple of these that I'm going to use. So I can copy and paste those in. All right. And so you'll notice I have a trailing space on this one, and that's so that it runs once I actually paste it in or use that macro. So I'm going to call this 10 largest open files. And these are just some general useful macros I found or one-liners that I found online. There's a ton of different ones you could use, and really this would make your life a lot easier to have these readily available. This one will be called journal CTL errors. Okay. And I'm going to make one more just for fun. We're going to call this assorted usernames. Assorted usernames. Awesome. All right, click OK. Cool. Now I've got my 3 here. Coming over to my already open Ubuntu section, I'm going to actually close that, but I'm going to right click and go to properties. And if you arrow over on here and go to macro, you'll see this enable macro. I can say, yes, I would like to see that. Now I can show all of the typing macros in the entire vault, or I can choose custom selection and kind of hand pick what ones and what order I want them to show. So I'm just going to do that for fun. Click OK, add all 3 of these guys in here, and click OK. So now when I actually launch this, you'll notice I have these awesome one button scripts on here. So if I click one of them, you'll notice it runs right away. You don't have to have that if you leave that trailing new line off, but you can kind of see how each one of these, you just have those easy to use macros for whenever you need it. And it's super handy, so you don't have to remember all the different code. So yeah, that was, I wanted to cover a bunch of different ways that you can manage your connections against different systems and, help automate some of that. So I kind of wanted to jump over and talk about enhanced security measures. So security is always difficult. Threats are kind of constantly evolving. Keeping up isn't easy. And RDM offers different methods, layers of security that fit just about any need. With that flexibility comes a challenge of knowing what to configure and when. So advanced permissions user group abilities are only available through advanced data sources. Here I will demonstrate Active Directory integration, DVLS, and some fine-grained permissions. So the general idea behind this is that you must first gatekeep DVLS itself, and we can do that with an Active Directory group. And we can use the AD users and computers dashboard that's built in to RDM to kind of quickly create what we need. So this is something I found a while back, and I absolutely love it. Instead of opening up AD users' computers, I actually have that right in the dashboard itself. So in RDM. So I can actually create this. I'm just going to call it AD dashboard. And that's remote management Active Directory dashboard. Let's say my domain, use LDAP over SSL. And once that it's there, I can open this up. You notice I have this awesome built-in view to AD users' computers within RDM itself. So pretty easy to use. So I'm actually going to create some groups here. And the first one I'm going to create is my gatekeeper group, my DVLS users. And this is going to be used for, I'm going to add people to this that I want to be able to even access DVLS. I'm going to create that. It's been successfully created. Create another new group here. I'm going to just call this DVLS help desk. Okay. Create another one, DVLS administrators. And one more. Call this DVLS server admins. And you can organize this in 100 different ways, but it's just kind of showing a little bit how you might want to organize it. All right, with that, I want to actually create a help desk user. So I'm just going to call this help desk user. Very Now, in a real world, you wouldn't want to use generic accounts in this sense, but this just to show. And so I'm going to actually use this awesome password generator built in. So this can actually align with your password policies under different templates. So you don't have to jump back and forth. But I'm going to use one of these, save this for later, and put this in here. And click OK. Awesome. So we have our user. But I'm going to add them to some groups, which you can actually do within here as well. They need to access DVLS. So I'm going to add them to the DVLS group. Click OK. I'm going to then add them to the help desk group because this is where the vault access will come in and what it's tied to. So help desk user. There we go. Awesome. So with those two, I'm going to actually go over to DVLS itself. Close my law authentications here. I'm going to refresh that. Spend a moment. And let's log in. There we go. DVLS, admin. And it's pretty bare bones. You can see, though, all of the things we've been working on pulled in there. But I'm going to go over to administration. And we need to actually turn this, integrate this with AD. So, but before I do that, I do want to create some vaults. So I'm going to go to vaults. I'm going to click the plus sign. And I am going to create a help desk vault. All the other defaults here are fine. And then I'm going to create a server admins vault. Add. There we go. That's about all we need for this. All right. Now we actually want to enable AD authentication. So I'm going to go over and click server settings and authentication. And I'm going to check the authenticate with domain user. You'll notice this little domain pops in here. But before, make sure to click save because it's going to prompt to save if I click on this without doing that. I'm going to click the domain. Now I already kind of have this pre-populated a little bit, but domain.local, I'm just going to call this AD domain. And I do need some credentials, so I'm going to make sure my admin user has the right connection. Looks good. Click OK. I am going to enable LDAP-S, always a good idea. And this feature, auto create on first login. This means you don't have to pre-create the users in there. And I'm going to say user and only from this DVLS users group, which you can find by just searching like that. Everything else will stay the same. I'm going to click save. And next, now that we have that, we're going to actually set up the user groups. So going back to administration, we're going to click user groups. I'm going to click the plus sign. And by default, it's Devolutions Server, but I can actually use domain groups. So here I can use help desk. And you'll notice it has a little Windows icon there to indicate it's a domain group. Same with this, DVLS server admins. And one more, making sure to change to the right thing there, DVLS administrators. And this one I'm going to check is admin, which means they have access to all of the vaults. All right, so I've got my groups. I'm good to go, but I need to change the permissions of the vaults first. So I'm going to go click on vault. Now, when a user first comes in to DVLS, they're actually going to get, regardless of whether or not I've told them if they have default vault access, even if I uncheck that in user group, it's going to add that to the user. So I don't want them to see all this stuff. And normally this all might be in a different vault anyways, but because they're going to get that default vault, I want to remove the permissions for everyone, except for the admins. So I'm going to click the little pencil icon to edit on the vault. I'm going to go to security and permissions. I'm going to say never for add and root, and I'm going to say permission is never. And by doing this, I'll click update. You'll notice my permissions don't change because I'm an admin right now in this, but it does mean everyone else won't be able to see those entries. They'll see the default vault, just not what's in it. Now I want to navigate over to the help desk vault, and I want to do the same. Click the properties. I'm going to go security, permissions, and I'm going to set custom permissions for adding and root. In this case, I want just the server admins to be able to do it. the administrators by default have the ability to do this. So I'm going to click OK. You can kind of see who has what there. And instead of never, I'm going to do custom. And I'm going to use this grant access button to make it easy to do this. So the first one, I'm going to replace all the existing permissions with the server admins. And a really cool feature that was recently added was this permission set. These are kind of default sets. You can make your own, but it means that you have these sets of permissions that you don't have to think about. In this case, I want contributor for the server admins. And you'll notice it sets all these different ones. Click OK. I'm going to click grant access one more time, add to existing. And for the help desk, I want them just to have this operator just so they can run stuff, and click OK. You'll notice that we have all these custom permissions on here. Who has what? Click update, and we are good to go. Now I'm going to just make an RDP RDP session that we can use in here. I'm going to make this username password, link their credentials to show this working, much like we did before. Local, add in my super password here and click add. I'm going to click plus sign, create an RDP session as well. And just you don't need the template on this one, so I'm just going to click continue, and this will be that DC2, if I remember the name, 23092209. All right, and I'm going to link this to those credentials that I had previously made. I do need the host in there, so let's just copy and paste that over, and good. All right, so now I have something for them to test. And with the permissions all set up, we need to test this out. So I'm going to switch over. So this is private windows, so we can see. And now we have two buttons here. We have this AD domain and this Devolutions Server. I'm going to click the AD domain. I'm going to click help desk user. Put in that password that we generated for him. Sign in. And this is the very first time they sign in. They've never done this before. So, you know, it just automatically got them in. And I knew I forgot something, which is to actually grant the user groups what vaults. So in this case, for help desk, I should have given them help desk. So if I do that, grant them access to that, the only thing you have to do with that, if you change, as with most systems, sign them out, sign them back in. User, the password, sign in, and there's help desk. And you'll notice that they have these two, but they can't edit and they can't view like the password on this. So to actually do this, they could run it. You know, they have the access to do that, but they can't do much more than it. So it's a great way to kind of integrate with integrate with the different systems, Active Directory, make sure that everyone's on the same page. You can use the domain user groups and just make it life a lot easier for organizing everything. So I want to kind of jump to the final section here, which is scalability and collaboration. So this is a bit more of a hodgepodge of a couple things, but I wanted to highlight features within RDM that are useful in the team context, because keeping everyone on the same page with RDM is great, but it's difficult when everyone's in different tools. So if there's a couple of unique features and tools that RDM offers, then hey, let's use them and make life a little easier for everyone in that day-to-day. So I wanted to show one that I always think is super cool, is session recording. So with this, you have a couple different options here. You can record local or you could record remote. So I'm going to show the local way to do it first, and then I'll show the remote way. So for example, let me close a couple of these windows as we've proliferated it within our demo here. All right. Getting back to this dashboard. All right, so I'm going to take a look at this RDP session here. I'm going to go to properties. And I'm going to go down to session recording. And I'm going to say, you know what? It's required. Every time somebody launches this, they're gonna need to record it. I want a log. I'm going to say local destination. I'm going to say a custom one here on this system. I'm just going to say videos. I'm going to say, the default entry name plus date time is fine. You know what? I'm going to say upload and background. I'm going to click OK. So now when I open up this RDP session, you'll notice it has that little recording thing going on over there, that little red dot. And it means that it's actively recording, it's streaming. And for RDP sessions, it's saved in the WebM format. By default, for like SSH sessions, it's saved in this TRP format, which is a format to save the actual content of the console itself. But once this is going, I'm going to just close it. You can then go over to logs, though. You can see that, hey, there was a recording on that. And if I go over to my videos on this, even though it's recording in the background, and you'll see I have a couple here, but it is uploading it at the moment, and you'll be able to access those later on. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that if you have multiple team members and they're all recording to their local workstations, then it could be a real challenge to grab all that stuff to find it. Maybe a workstation dies and you need to figure out. So what if you could do the same thing, but remotely record these sessions? And so there used to be an older way to do this, but the current way is Devolutions Gateway actually does it. Now, I've already installed Gateway itself on here in the side-by-side mode, which means that it has the ability to run on the DVLS server itself. It just makes it easier in this context, but very flexible. You don't have to do that. But before I do the session recording for it, I need to double check something. So if I actually go over to System Settings and go to Recording Server, enable Devolutions Gateway Recording, that's pretty much all I have to do for that. And then I actually do need to restart RDM to pull that up. So let me close that, because it did for that setting to reflect. I do need to restart RDM. So once that comes back up in a moment here, as it's thinking, come on, RDM, you can do it. This is a VM in Azure, and at times it can be pokey. So I should have opted for the much higher level of performance, I think. There it is. All right. So once this loads back in, all right, switch this back over to our DVLS data source. All right, so now I'm going to go back down to my DC here. I'm going to check properties, and I'm going to go over to session recording. And for this recording, now I have this remote option. So with that remote, I can click OK. And just like before, when I launch this, it's going to do the little red indicator showing that it is recording. And it's going to just kind of do its thing. We'll move a window. Okay. Super long recording. I close that. But now when I go over to the logs, you'll notice I have this option to download it, because it's saying it's recorded and I can pull that from the server. So if I click that button, it's going to ask me, hey, where do you want to save this file? And because it's a WebM file, typically you open that in the browser. It's a compressed video format that works really well. It's just not, the built-in Windows utilities don't always recognize it, but drag that into Chrome and it'll work just fine. So, hey, we figured out how to do session recording both remote and local, and it's super useful if you want to make sure that all those sessions are recorded for each of your team members, just to know, maybe you forgot something or a command or an error. The amount of times that I wish I could have gone back and actually pulled up a recording of what I'd done, this would have been crazy useful in those contexts. And having it all logged and right there, it's awesome. But what if I'm saying like, cool, I got this session recording. I want to pull up some documentation on this specific system. Well, you could jump over to a different system, and this does link to other systems, or you have this built-in Markdown, which is really cool because it's a good editor. And since Markdown is a very universal format, you can export this. You can use it in a ton of different areas, and so I'm gonna just say this is a test. You can do tables, you can do images, code blocks, all of that stuff. And I'm going to say, save that. And so, yeah, I have this. But what I really wanted to show is if I do test 2 and say save, and then I can go over to history and I can actually say compare. And you'll notice you actually can compare the changes in documentation. And so very useful if for some reason I pulled out an IP address that should have stayed in there and I should have left, or a note about a patch update. And you can actually create multiple pages and very easily organize your information this way, link to other documentation pages. So crazy useful, especially for those managing servers or customer environments that just want to have that right there in their face without jumping between different systems. And so to go along with that, and as we kind of saw before, tracking asset information is very useful. So I could put a bunch of this information in here, but there is this really nice little load from system information button. This actually uses WMI to go out and query the system and pull back a bunch of information on it. And it does date time stamp it to say this is the last time it did it, which means that you could say, okay, maybe I need to update this or last time, but it does mean that I don't have to necessarily populate all this stuff myself. It does take a second because it's using WMI, and WMI tends to be slow. But you see status success, and look, I've got a ton of information right there. In fact, that MAC address I could have used in my script earlier if I wanted. I just didn't want to have to click this for each one. But you can see software, some hardware. These are VMs. This is what I populated before, but very useful to have so that I don't have to really go and look, and I get some info right there. And to kind of go along with that, if you look right below it, there's this awesome reference to owners and teams and others. So for this, knowing who I should actually contact for a given system is half the time the challenge of like, who do I talk to when something breaks, or where should I escalate it? So you can make contacts. In this case, I'll make myself in here and click OK. And there I am. And now I can actually say, sure, I'm the owner of it. But what if I want to say, contact first? In this case, I'll add myself again. But this is also a way that you can say, okay, these are the lines, folks, secondary support, a person to ask about a database on there, easy way that you can actually see who all to contact and in what fashion, especially super useful if you're in the heat of battle and all of a sudden, who do I talk to? Who do I need to bring in on this? And so now that I've got all that information on this, asset, documentation, recording, know who to talk to. What if I want to actually very quickly see, whenever I open this up, I need to record a comment and a ticket, or both, or either. You could actually do that and require people to do it. So if you go over to the logs section on open, when open logs, basically saying opening the session, I can say prompt for comment on open. And I can either require both or one or the other, or none, and just leave it optional. But say I'm going to require a ticket number. So that means that every time I open this connection or somebody, I'm going to have to do, enter some value in here. And with this, you'll notice the OKs, not let me go on. But I'm going to just say, sure, ticket 100. Now I can go on since the comment's not required, but I can put that in, say okay. And you'll notice it's already recording. So it's forced to do that, which means I have even more logging there. And you can actually require on when you close it as well. But for this, now that I have that connection opened, my recording, I have a comment, and I have a ticket number. So I know a whole bunch of information all at once, and it makes it really easy to to kind of track who's doing what. And the very final thing I wanted to round this out at is I want to show that the other thing that I'm often tracking is tasks. So on a given system, if I want to say, no, man, I got to do patching. Well, there is this built-in task that's linked to each entry in here. And so I can actually create tasks, say, patch servers. And you can say a priority, a due date, a user might be assigned to, a comment, whatever it might be, status, and so this is specific to that entry. So it disappears when I move off of it, but you'll notice that I now have this thing I can track and I can do. And in fact, even if I wanted to flag this server more, I've got this here. If you actually go over to status, I can actually put a status and say like, hey, warning, add something there. I need to do something about this. Warning, there's different stats you can add, but a great way that you can really pull everything together to highlight what I need to do when and with whom. And so hopefully this shows how RDM can kind of bring everything together and really help you and your team do as much as possible. And so with that, as my rapid fire approach to getting as much information for everyone as I possibly could in that time. Hopefully, that will conclude on a high note and say, hey, hopefully this is helpful.
Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around to the end of this webinar. If you like this type of content, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe as well to our channel. That way we'll know that you'll want to see more of this type of content. Thanks again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.